This is All India Radio. In Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on NITI Aayog Governing Council meeting and outcomes. The participants are Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Ruchika Chitravanshi, journalist.
The sixth meeting of the Governing Council of NITI Aayog was held yesterday under the chairmanship of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The Prime Minister has backed private sector role in order to make India a self-reliant nation. Mr. Iyer, can you take us through what were the key takeaways from this meeting and what is the significance of the Governing Council meeting? This was the sixth one, we understand.
This was the sixth council meeting, as you mentioned, and there were six major thrust areas that were taken up for discussion between the centre and the state, with the centre being represented by the Prime Minister himself. And in attendance were 26 chief ministers, 3 lieutenant governors, 2 administrators. And apart from that, there were union ministers who are ex-officio members of the NITI Aayog. And you also had participations from several chief secretaries and others. And the discussions were moderated by the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh Ji. Now, if you look at the thrust areas, that gives us an idea of what is the key areas on which the Prime Minister as well as the central government wanted the states to focus on. One is making India a manufacturing powerhouse. The next was to look at the agriculture, which is currently in focus because of the 3 farm laws. And then the other was, what should be done to improve the physical infrastructure, across the states. Then to look at human resource development and see what can be done to further accelerate this development. And then looking at what kind of steps that are in the process or already being taken to ensure delivery of services at the grassroots level. And then lastly, the discussion also focused on health and nutrition. Now, in fact, this meeting we saw from the remarks made by the Prime Minister, which were rather very, very frank and very candid. In fact, the Prime Minister mentioned the fact that, India has a lot of talents, whether it is entrepreneurial talent or whether it is innovative talent, there's a lot of talent. But when it comes to final development of products, we don't seem to be in a position to do what countries like America or Europe or Japan have been able to achieve. So therefore, the Prime Minister drew attention to the fact that a company like Google could have been developed in India, had that kind of enabling policy support was there at a time when Google became a big company. So he said that one of the ways we can create a situation where you can have enterprises like Google is to take advantage of this production linked scheme. So that is the main thing. And for instance, he mentioned about the fact that geospatial data, which has been recently liberalized, if this could have been done 10 years ago, maybe somebody could have thought of a Google-like enterprise in India. So even in Google, what is to be noticed is a lot of the human resource which is working at Google, comes from India. So in terms of talents, Indians are no less in the talent pool, their contribution. But what is needed is that kind of policy initiatives. Of course, the center has announced several policy initiatives, but the states also must also get into that what is called competitive and cooperative federalism. Look at, policy initiatives that are broadly at a national level and see how it can be done at the state level. And even within the state, the Prime Minister suggested, why not look at products that can be developed in a particular district or a district considered with all the factors that help in the development of a particular product. So each district a product. So similarly, each region can focus on what can be done best and with what are resources available and within the parameters of a national policy. I think that's a very interesting observation. And the Prime Minister particularly mentioned the several schemes that have been in operation, particularly for the MSMEs and startups.
Absolutely. It's a very intriguing question that why can't we develop a company like Google in India? Do you think that enough steps have been taken and has Governing Council showed us some way as to how India can boost innovative thinking and then also enable the whole journey from ideation to execution? How can states and center, as you mentioned, cooperative federalism come together to make that a reality? Does the Governing Council talk about that?
Indeed, the Developing Council deliberated on several steps, for making India a manufacturing powerhouse. And with the Prime Minister also drew attention to the fact, most of the entrepreneurs have a common complaint, which is there is too much of compliance and so much of rules and regulations. For adhering to those compliances will have to be given. There is so much of paperwork even in a paperless situation. You have to file a lot of compliance regulations. So what the Prime Minister suggested was, why not some reforms? Just as the center did away with more than 1,200 laws which were considered absolutely obsolete. Similarly, why not the states also look at this compliance burden in terms of if you have been cleared a compliance at one level, I mean, there should be a single window kind of thing when it comes to a compliance so that any entrepreneur who comes with bubbling with enthusiasm and manage to get an investor is not stuck in just getting clearances, to start his startup. So that kind of thing should be avoided. And also, we have to improve the logistics in terms of which is center already concentrating on speed up corridors, speed up railway network, better air connectivity, and also keep focus on export. The most important is we'll have to look at the untapped markets. Because we are talking of the crisis in our agriculture. Prime Minister mentioned, we are importing edible oil that is to the tune of 60,000 crore to 65,000 crore. Now, this kind of money we are spending just to import edible oil. Now, could not this money be transferred to our own farmers if they were more and more into oilseed manufacture? As a suggestion, this was mooted. Now, for this, the states will have to do something. But if you look at it, some states are doing more than other states. And some states are refusing to even come into this on the plea that this is going to encourage private sector or there will be domination by some big companies. Because this is the same argument that has been used in the respect of farm sector laws also. So therefore, the Prime Minister mentioned particularly that we will have to see that, the physical infrastructure should also move forward. Of course, several chief ministers come with their suggestions how capital investment can be increased. Because the states always look at, rather they would always prefer that the central government, bear the burden of infrastructure investment because they cite their own source crunch. But from their part also, the state should be willing to show, they are encouraging in infrastructure development and they are also entering into some private-public partnerships, improving last-mile connectivity and then reducing the energy costs. So that overall, when a project is implemented, entrepreneur can take advantage of the central schemes and incentives and can get similar kind of cooperation from the state governments and from district authorities.
Export is one big area where we are looking to boost the Indian industry. The budget also has announced various steps towards this direction. What is the role of center and state, the whole cooperative federalism, in order to make this a reality, as you said, because a lot of these subjects, as you mentioned, health, etc., they're all concurrent list subjects. And when it comes to infrastructure also, as you mentioned, that states want center to bear the burden of the whole expenditure. So how are we going to resolve this situation? Because, as you mentioned, both have to come together.
Now, take for instance, when you talk of infrastructure projects, one of the biggest hurdle is the land acquisition. Now, we did see during the first term of Prime Minister Modi, the land acquisition bill was brought and it created a lot of furor. There was a strident campaign by the opposition parties. And finally, the center decided that the land acquisition bill, which was thought of by the center, will be the model bill. And the states can take it up. They can have their own state laws on the basis of that model, which is to make land acquisition an easy proposition for infrastructure projects. I think similarly, there are other areas which the states can, be an active participant, because today you have states like Bengal, for instance, which is actually for political reasons has not been able to take full advantage of many of the infrastructure projects. And since state governments are headed by political parties other than a party which is ruling at the center, often what happens is political issues get clouded. So this talk of cooperation, the cooperative federalism gets affected. So there are issues like, Odisha Chief Minister Naveen Patnaik pointed out. Look, let not every issue be turned into a political battlefield. And consequently, everybody is, looking at these issues in terms of that there is the luxury of time, that we can go on having these debates, whether ideological or otherwise. And while, entrepreneurs are, actually are suffering because they don't have time. And in the meantime, when we are fighting over ideological issues and how to go about it, if, one step is taken, we see sometimes some states are taking 3 steps back. Take, for instance, even the farm laws. See, after the central law was passed, you had states controlled by some opposition parties actually passing resolution or laws to counter the central law. Now, this is purely for political reasons. This is not a very healthy attitude towards encouraging innovation or encouraging investment. Because obviously, if I'm an investor, I'm going to get confused by central law and then, some state laws being passed, which is supposed to be against it, though finally the legality of all this will be settled by the apex court maybe sometime later. But in the meantime, as an investor, I have lost time and maybe I have lost enthusiasm. So therefore, I think the states as well as the central government must come together on some issues and realize that these are the best to take things forward so that the development takes place at a faster pace. You see, the Prime Minister used to say that if there is a single thing that is a solution for all our problems, whether it is poverty or unemployment or even lack of nutrition or condition of women or child welfare, all this has to do with the pace of development. So we need to agree on what are the things that need to move faster. If it is the legislative process that is delaying it, that must be speeded up. If it is want of infrastructure, that must be done faster. Whether it is accessibility in terms of water or other factors, then those things must be made easy, and state must look at it in terms of a competitive federalism, which is what the Prime Minister often says. Like, for instance, if it is a competition between, say, if they are trying to woo the investor to come and invest in that state, they must be able to compete among themselves so that they can offer a better deal. Now, that kind of attitude is yet to come because a lot of the states are burdened by this politics.
In fact, Prime Minister has made the case for the farm laws while he said that farmers need support in terms of economic support, infrastructure and modern technology, which require reforms, and reforms are important. One of the important things that he's talked about is the role of private sector and that how important it is in the development journey of the country. And he said that we have to honor this enthusiasm and this energy of the private sector and give it as much opportunity. Do you think he's hinting at some of the laws and all that create problems for the private sector to flourish in India, and probably hinting towards how the policy should shape going forward, especially in a post-pandemic scenario?
Today, the private sector has a lot of talents, lot of entrepreneurial talents, and they also have exposure to a lot of financial resources. Because the states, particularly the governments are, actually, I would say, they are restrained by a limit on their resources. So that is why this talk of private-public partnership is essentially that, because what the public units can do is they can give you land, they can give you other things. But in terms of entrepreneurial talent, in terms of managerial talent, the private sector is more time-bound and is more outcome-bound compared to state-run enterprises, which are rather, caught up in a lot of process. That's why Prime Minister keeps saying, let us be, more outcome-oriented rather than process-oriented. And that is his constant advice to the bureaucracy also to the state governments. I mean, look at what is the final shape of thing that is going to come, rather than getting caught in rules, regulations, and things like that. And also, see, some states have done very well. If you look at Tamil Nadu or Karnataka, even say Kerala, because they have been actually competing with some other states, which is actually what is called the competing federalism, trying to woo investors. But this practice has to become more widespread, and every state should also try to emulate the best practices that they notice in other states. So therefore, the whole idea should be, what is our goal? Now, the goal is that we need to take advantage of this post-pandemic situation where old ways of doing things no longer work. But new ways will have to be thought of very quickly and adapted, because we will have to transform. We have to innovate and transform. Then only we will be able to perform and meet our objectives. And particularly, even if our objective is to create jobs. And that was the basic message of this Governing Council's deliberations.
Thank you so much, Mr. Iyer, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ruchika.
This is All India Radio. In Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on NITI Aayog Governing Council meeting and outcomes. The participants are Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Ruchika Chakravanshi, journalist. You were listening to a discussion on NITI Aayog Governing Council meeting and outcomes. The participants were Shekhar Iyer, political analyst, and Ruchika Chakravanshi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsttalks@gmail.com.